Welcome to Page 1, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page 1. I'm Zita Christian. My guest tonight is a novelist, a poet, a freelance writer, a former librarian with Columbia University and the University of Connecticut at Storrs, and a former colleague of mine at the Bushnell. He's here tonight to talk about his new book, and his name is David Garnes. David, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thanks for asking me, Zita. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you again, too. We have so many wonderful things to talk about. So, primarily the book. Okay. Give me the title of the new book and tell me what it's about.
The title of the book is Waitin, not waiting, but Waitin for the Train to Come In, a novel of World War II.
Okay, and so it is a novel and it is about World War II.
Correct.
Okay, now I know that you set the book in Springfield, Massachusetts.
I did.
So why did you choose Springfield?
Well, the main reason, I suppose, is that the book is partly autobiographical, and I did grow up in Springfield, so I knew a lot about Springfield. I knew something about the war, World War II, in Springfield, and it was Springfield, I thought, was a good city to set a book about World War II in because of the armory, because of Westover Field, because of its size. So all of those things kind of made it the logical city to set the book in.
I always think a sense of place is so important to a story, and when you have some kind of a personal frame of reference, I think it makes the writer more confident to write. So you know the area from growing up there.
Yeah.
That's a very good reason.
Although I had to do a lot of research.
Oh, I'm sure you did, and I do want to get to that. I bet you did do quite a bit. One of the things that I noticed in the book, and I love World War II stories. It's an era that fascinates me. My dad, served in World War II, and and I think about that time he and my mom met and fell in love, and so all those things. So we're going to get to some of that in a minute. But you have some big themes in your book, and I want to ask you a little bit about each of those. First, one of those big themes is the changing role of women. Talk to me a little bit about how you explore that in the story.
Yeah, I have this theory. I don't think it's particularly original, but a lot of things began in World War II. A lot of things that finally exploded in the 60s really had their origin during the war years. And one of those, I think, was the emerging awareness of women that they really needed to be treated as equals in our society. And so I focused, two of the four main characters in the book are women. There's a mother and an aunt and a little boy and a father, and those are the four main characters. And I have the two women involved in situations that have to do with their taking on jobs that they normally would not have been involved in as either as homemakers, or in the case of the aunt, who's single, she becomes a supervisor in a factory, which would not probably have happened had it not been for the war.
Yeah.
Now, of course, at the end of the war, most of them went right back to the kitchen.
Whether they wanted to or not.
Correct.
And for those women who did not want to, or even if they did, perhaps they wanted something different for their daughters when they grew up. So yes, I agree with you. I think a lot of the changes. Well, right now, I guess we take for granted, but the world was not always the way that way, especially for women.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's a big theme. What about the whole adjustment of veterans returning from the war, and the not only the adjustment that the veteran, him or herself, makes, but society's views, society's acceptance of the veteran. Talk with me a little about how you explore that in the book.
Well, I think, for one thing, World War II was quite different in that I think the vets who came back from the war were treated as heroes. So there wasn't the issue that we more recently have seen with Vietnam, for example. However, I think there was still a big adjustment because they were coming back to a society where, for example, their wives might have been working. They had left children who were very young when they went off to war. They came back. There was the whole question of what their relationship would be with their kids. So that the men, it was a challenging time for men returning from the service as well. And I do explore that in the character of the father.
And the whole idea of what life was like in the wartime factories, because you mentioned one of the four main characters, a woman becomes a supervisor in a factory. So factory life for women, I mean, that had to be a whole new terrain.
And not only that, but factories actually changed during the war. Now, the woman in the book who goes to work in the factory and becomes a supervisor is working at the Milton Bradley company in Springfield, which, of course, was a toy and game factory, and school supplies as well. But during the war, and a lot of people don't know this, they actually were involved in the manufacture of wooden gun handles. And that was they had a big contract with the military.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and also one of their big contracts was to produce GI kits that were sent over in the hundreds of thousands, probably millions, of little games and stationery and so forth. And that was so that they were very much affected by the war. And of course they did well during the war. A lot of companies did well.
Oh yes, yeah. What about one of what I think is a big one that's explored in your book, the struggles of childhood and adolescence. I mean, because the war did not, the effect on the war was not just the men and women who were serving in the military, but the people at home and the children. I think they're so often overlooked. The effect of children who were living through this. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, I have one of the four main characters is a little boy. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the book is somewhat autobiographical. However, I was too young. I remember the very, very end of the war, but in order to make the boy understand what was going on and have some things happen in the book that he had to be involved in, that had I made him the same age as I was would not have been possible. I made him 10 years old when the book begins in 1943.
Okay.
So he witnesses the leaving of his father to go into the service, as well as a 17-year-old neighbor who's kind of the kid he looks up to, the older kid he looks up to. So he's very much affected by the war. His mother goes off to work. She had not worked before. Now she goes to work at the Mass Mutual Life Insurance Company, which only during the war began to hire married women with children.
Oh.
They had never hired women with children before.
It was such a different world then.
Imagine.
And I think young women out there now listening to this would be going, "You got to be kidding!"
I know. And this isn't so long ago.
No, it was not.
I mean, a lot of us can still, either vaguely or quite vividly remember the war.
Yes.
So so he's very much affected by what happens. Now there's a grandmother who's a secondary character in the book who is there to take care of him. He was one of the lucky ones, but a lot of kids for the first time, and quite unexpectedly, had both their parents not around.
Yeah.
At least the mother during the day. And that was not usual. That was very much the exception in those days.
Very much so. And I think people made that kind of sacrifice knowing that, the whole philosophy was, this is for the war, it's the war effort. And there was just a totally different mindset. And I also think everyone in the country, approximately everyone, had a connection to the war. It is certainly not that way now with Afghanistan.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there was everyone, as you said, virtually everyone was behind the war.
Yeah.
So that wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, changes had to be made.
Well, and I think too, when you think about roles of women and returning veterans, the whole idea about life in a factory, even now as factories are changing with the advent of all the robotics. I mean, we're hearing about some of that very close to home. There is certainly there's a resonance of what you have talked about here in 1943 that is right here in 2013-14 as well.
Yeah.
Some things don't change.
No, absolutely.
So I want to talk with you about the research that you did, because there's a lot of research in here. And just to pick up a couple things, and then I'm going to ask you how you did this.
Sure.
You have in there a lot of information, and not dry, I mean it's story information. Air raid drills, rationing, holiday and end of war celebrations, and then life in the Navy. And of course my dad was in the Navy, so I'm very interested here. The basic training and kamikaze attacks, I remember hearing stories about that. The whole idea of typhoons, and then what being on Liberty was like if you were in Honolulu.
I have seen.
So talk to me. How did you research this? Who'd you talk to?
I did talk to a lot of people. I talked to people in Springfield. My parents are both gone, so they weren't available to talk to, although my mother had talked a lot about life during the war. My dad, who was in the Navy during the war, he didn't. One of my regrets is that I never really got too much information from him. He didn't really like to talk about the war. However, a very good friend, one of my mother's best friends, was alive at the time. She died about 1.5 years ago. But she was a wealth of information. She and I had remained very close to her even after my mother had died. And I spent a lot of time with her. She remembered everything. She remembered what her beginning salary at the Mass Mutual was like. She remembered how much tokens on the bus were. She remembered that in Springfield there was one hotel nightclub where the officers went, and there was another one where the enlisted men went. And she just had a lot of information. And there were a couple of other people I spoke to like her. So I actually did speak to people. But I did a lot of research at the Springfield Public Library. I became a member, so I would have access, easily to everything. And I've since continued that just to support them. But I spent a lot of time there, and I went through all the newspapers, city directories, which city directories are wonderful.
Oh, so tell me what you can find
there.
Well,
you can look up every person who lives at an address, a particular address, or who lived at a particular address. You can find out how old they were, where they worked. You can find out all the businesses. So I was really able to kind of reconstruct the neighborhood very, very easily through those directories. I remembered a few things, but I wouldn't have been able to do it.
And this was before social media, and that information was still out there. You just had to look a little harder.
Yeah, it was there, but you had to look. I was surprised at how much was in those directories, actually.
What about Hawaii? I mean, how did you get the information for...
There's a lot. Here's where the web came in to play, because a lot of people have put their memories of their years in the service on the web. And interesting story, when I was looking for information about LSTs, I actually put LSTs are, yes, I'm glad you reminded me to say what those are. LST stands for Landing Ship Tank. And it's the type of ship that the character in the book, the father in the book, is on. He's a radar man on an LST that is in the Pacific. Well, in finding out about the specific ship that he was on, because I had a mimeograph ship's log that had apparently been given to all the crew members on this particular ship. So I was able to follow the whole course of the war through the ship's log, that particular ship's log. So that was wonderful. Well, as I was searching, I found a blog that one of the crew members had put on, one of the crew members who had been on the same ship. And among there was narrative, but there were also photographs. And at one point I clicked a link, and up came a picture taken on the deck of all the radar and radio men on that ship, and there was my father.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. It was really one of those, kind of heart-stopping moments because
my gosh.
I recognized him immediately. He was very tall, and it was really thrilling to see that. So there he was on the World Wide Web.
What are the chances?
So I wrote to the man
Yeah.
who lived in Pennsylvania, and he wrote me right away and said yes, he remembered my father really clearly because he was so tall.
Oh my gosh.
And he thought that he remembered that they had gone into Tokyo Bay together. But anyway, that was really exciting. But I found a lot of information, and so too about wartime Hawaii. There was a lot about Hawaii. A lot of very interesting information.
It's so good that people are willing to share their personal stories and photographs. I mean, how your book is so much more enriched because of that, but also a personal experience to see a picture of your dad there.
That was a really exciting moment.
What a
I'll never forget when I saw that. I thought, I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
I had never seen that picture either.
Great.
I had never seen it before.
I'm going to ask you, this would be a good time. The show is page 1, and I usually ask if the guest is an author to read page 1. But I'm going to ask you to read a different section in your book, because I think when the author reads a little bit of the book, it gives those in the viewing audience kind of a feel for your style. So if you would, please. If you would
you had mentioned this before, and I looked for a piece. I thought I would do, since most of the book takes place on the home front, in Springfield. So I thought I would read just a very short piece. In the course of the book, and around a third of the way through the book, the boy goes for the weekend. The 17-year-old I mentioned, the neighbor, has come home on leave from camp, and he will eventually end up in Europe. But they go for the weekend down to Groton, to a cottage that a relative owns, and they spend the weekend there. So I'm just going to read a little piece about that because I think it gives a good sense of what wartime life was along the coast. This is very short, though.
Okay.
Let's see. After a late lunch at the cottage, they returned to the beach, now dotted brightly with big canvas umbrellas and blankets, even though the parking lot didn't have as many cars as in years past. By the time they returned to the house late in the day, Billy and Angie could feel their backs burning. Now, Billy is the little boy. Angie is the younger sister of the 17-year-old. After dinner, Sal fell asleep on the sofa, and Angie and Mrs. Mazzarella set off for the little general store near the shore road. Billy decided to take a walk along the beach. The sky had become overcast, and a breeze rustled the high grass that bordered the dunes down near the more deserted stretches of sand. It was low tide, and in the distance, Billy could see a few people digging for clams, their bent figures moving slowly in the shallow water. Further out, against the horizon, barrels and other floating barriers bobbed up and down. Overhead, an olive-colored plane with a white star roared past, flying low in a straight line along the beach. Billy shivered. He wished he'd brought along the plaid flannel shirt his mother had insisted on packing. He turned away from the water toward a series of wooden planks he knew led up to the narrow dirt road that ran parallel to the beach. Suddenly there was movement in the grass and the sound of a deep-throated growl. From behind a dune, an enormous German shepherd dog appeared, panting and straining at a short leash held by a sailor carrying a rifle. "Prince, heel!" The dog reluctantly obeyed, nervously sitting upright on the crushed grass and alternately looking at Billy and nudging the rough beige leggings worn by his master. "Gee, I'm sorry," Billy said. "I'm just here for the weekend, from Springfield in Massachusetts." The sailor laughed. "That's good to hear. Didn't look like you just washed up on shore. But Prince here doesn't know that, do you, boy?" He turned back to Billy. "Curfew is soon. Can't be out here after dusk, you know." "That's okay. I'm going back now anyway." Billy headed up toward the road. "Bye-bye. Bye, Prince." The dog gave a tentative wag of his tail, then a growl that was less threatening than his earlier snarls. As he walked back to the cottage, Billy wondered if Prince had once lived with a regular family. He tried to imagine Lucille in the Coast Guard. Now Lucille is their old dog who lives at home.
David,
So.
that was great. Thank you very much. That it illustrates so much. The war came right to the beaches here. I mean, the kid walking along.
People, I think, who didn't live through that or hear about it from their parents wouldn't understand that. You know, there were actually subs that were sighted very close.
Right off our coast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, tell me about. You know, you mentioned earlier that the book, there's a little bit of that's autobiographical, and I have to tell you, I have not met a writer yet who does not have something autobiographical.
That's right. And if they say that they don't, then I think they're
I don't believe it.
Forgetting.
Not at all.
No.
You can change the gender, the age, the whatever, but there's something autobiographical there. So when you were writing this book and the research you did, knowing that there was some truth to the story of your parents' story, did you gain any new insights into any of your family members, maybe to some of their struggles?
Yeah, I did. Particularly my parents. The grandmother in the book, she's a secondary character, but she's the character who probably least changes in the book. And it made me realize once again, I was very close to my grandmother, and she's the character in the book that kind of holds everyone together. Mm-hmm. She's the character who really changes the least. But in writing about the mother, I think I got a better understanding of my mother's wanting to have a career, but not really ever having one. My father didn't particularly want her to work. Mm-hmm. So in the book, I actually give her a career. So
you know,
I made that happen.
You fulfilled a wish,
I
or
did.
something like that. Did you ever find in writing the story, when you got to any part that was particularly difficult or poignant, did you cry in the writing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You start to you get very attached to your characters.
Yes.
And particularly when they really are, based on the family structure. It is the family structure in which I grew up. So yes, you do. You do. When bad things happen to the characters, I was very sad.
Oh yeah.
But that's good in a way.
I think it's excellent
because you become involved.
Well, yes. If it doesn't affect you emotionally, it's not going to affect the reader.
And I changed certain things. I mean, one other thing, I did get I think a better understanding of my father and some of the difficulties. This is in real life that he later had after the war.
Yeah, I don't think we realize the effect that war has.
No.
That's a huge subject. Yeah. I want to talk with you, we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask you a little bit about the whole concept of self-publishing, because that has changed radically in the past few years. Let me just remind the audience, too, that if you're just joining us now, I'm Zita Christian. The show is Page 1. My guest is David Garnes, and he has written this wonderful book, Waitin', not waiting.
Right.
Waitin' for the Train to Come In, a novel of World War II. And this wonderful book with this great picture on the front, and I know we can get a better shot of it over here on the other side.
That is my parents. But
I was just going to ask you that. Is that your parents in the picture?
It was taken in 1943. They were 27 years old. My father was home on leave.
So tell me, David, you make the choice to self-publish, and I know there are a lot of people in the audience who have done that or are contemplating that. And self-publishing today has changed dramatically over the years. Give me just quickly some of the advantages and some of the challenges.
Yeah. Well, I think the advantages are that you are sure to get your book published.
Yes.
That's obviously
that's a big one.
That's the big advantage. And I think there are other advantages. I've gone with Amazon with Create Space for this book and my last book, which was a book of memoir, an essay, a book of memoir essays. My first book I did through iUniverse. I've been particularly pleased with Amazon, and what I like is that the process is pretty simple. If you're at all adept with Word, with word processing, with using the computer. I only spoke on the phone a couple of times to them really during the whole process.
What about challenges?
Challenges? You really have to do a lot of your own marketing, although nowadays mainstream publishers do not market much for you.
No, everybody has to do that.
If you are a proven best-selling writer, yes, you might get sent out on a book tour, but I think otherwise you're pretty much on your own.
Yes.
So I don't even know if that's so different anymore. So I guess briefly, to me the advantages far outweigh the challenges. The one challenge is to get into bookstores. I think I'm going to be able to get into public libraries through either Baker and Taylor or Ingram, who are the big distributors. But I really don't have any. I have mostly positive things to say.
You know, I love to hear when an author has had a good experience like that. Tell me a little bit about how the book has been received. What have been some of the reviews been like?
Well, I've been really pleased. It's available on Amazon in both paper and
electronic.
as an Kindle, as an ebook. And I find every day when I look at Kindle, something's happened.
Something wonderful, yeah.
You know, I've had. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I've had several reviews on Amazon that have been very, very nice, very flattering.
Yeah.
A couple of them from people I know, but many more from people whom I don't know who they are.
World War II is a subject that a lot of people are interested in, either because they lived through it or their parents or relatives did. One of the things I wanted to also mention is, as people look at the book and think, wow, that's a substantial book. I love the fact that you made the choice to use big print.
Right.
Thank you very much, because as my eyes get older, they appreciate that was a gift that you did for people who like to hold a real book.
Yeah, it's not it's not big print the way you'd get a big print book at the library. That's specially big print. But I chose to use a larger rather than smaller font.
Yes.
For the very reason that you said, and also the book is long, and I didn't want people to be turned off not only by the length but by tiny print. So.
David, we have about a minute left, and I wanted to ask you about crossover skills, because you have also, in fact, we have a couple of the books here, you have also written essay and memoir and poetry, as well as this novel.
Right.
We have exactly a minute left. A little bit about crossover skills. How does one translate to the other?
I think, I guess, poetry is perhaps my least favorite of the three genres. With memoir, you are obligated to tell the truth. With fiction, you can use what has happened in your life, but it was a revelation to me to realize that, I don't have to have this come out the way it really did in real life. That's a big moment of finally understanding what the difference between fiction and nonfiction is.
And David, we have exactly 30 seconds left, and very quickly, advice for a new writer starting out, looking at to write a story.
Just sit down and write. Don't worry about your words. Don't worry about your style. Just let it come out. You have plenty of time later. That's number one. Number two, join a writer's group.
Oh, I agree.
I can't emphasize that.
I would agree with you totally. And David, thank you very, very much
for being
on the show. This was awesome.
Thank you, Zita.
And let me just say a thank you to my Page1 crew and to you in the viewing audience. I appreciate the fact that you're here to see the show tonight. I love to close with the words of the fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." So find your story, find a way to tell it, and do join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests is provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email Zita at zitatv.com or write to Zita Christian, Page1 TV, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut 06045-1515. You can watch this and other episodes of Page 1 on youtube.com/Zita3x3.